thanks for the comment here. What if Oklahoma didn't lose to Baylor and Oklahoma State? Oklahoma being playoff look like this. Once the Oklahoma versus Georgia, blah blah blah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a blessing in disguise, if I'm being honest, Edward. I don't know. I don't know what would have happened. I think Riley probably would have taken the job at USC regardless. But maybe it was a blessing in disguise. I truly feel that Oklahoma is going to be better in the future with Venables here, as opposed to the trajectory that Oklahoma had with Riley. I've mentioned this several times, but I'll mention it again. Oklahoma has consistently been in a downward trajectory every year since every new year, I guess I should say it that way, since Riley has been here. First year playoffs, should have beaten Georgia, didn't, but was very obviously very, very competitive in that game. Um, Second year lost to Alabama, was not, it wasn't a complete blowout, but was not as competitive as they were against Georgia. Third year, got Oklahoma completely got their doors blown off by LSU. Was not competitive at all from the opening kickoff. Then last year, Oklahoma doesn't even make the playoffs. Still win the Big 12 championship, but doesn't make the playoffs. And certainly this year, Oklahoma doesn't even win a Big 12 championship. Doesn't even get an opportunity to play in the Big 12 championship. So, with all those being said, Edward, in that downward trajectory that Oklahoma was on. I think this was an incredibly soft football team for a majority of the season, and I think that's going to do nothing but change. I see a 180 direction. It's hard to completely change a culture in a year, especially a culture of kind of a country club softness type of culture that Riley had just kind of chipped away at what Bob had built in his 16 years here. But I think having a guy like Bob come in here for the bowl game prep and then transitioning that to Brent, I think will be paramount for the Oklahoma success, and hopefully Oklahoma can get back to that renewed toughness and the suffocating smash mouth defense that Oklahoma played under Venables while he was here. Chad, I definitely agree. Not sure what went into play with Farouk not getting much playing time, but he looked great. He looked. I mean, you have this in a comment here, but watching him, I mean, maybe has something to do with the number 14, but he did look very eerily similar to Charleston Rambo out there. Like what he did, after the catch, making people miss, running tough. There was a couple of situations where he was tackled and he got a few yards after contact, so showed a little bit of toughness there that I didn't specifically know that he had. So Oklahoma's going to be good from a skill position perspective. You're not sure exactly who all Oklahoma will bring in from a skill position perspective, but Oklahoma's pretty much got everybody back minus Hazelwood and obviously minus Stogner from a tight end perspective. But Oklahoma's got a lot of skill position players back, and then they'll get some through the portal as well as they'll get some out of the recruiting cycle. So I like what Oklahoma has there. Preston, how did Major only have 5 carries going to the game, even ineligible for the first 6 games? Not like he did practice for no other place. Yeah, it was puzzling, Preston. I think for whatever reason, Riley seemed to hold back on his playing time. I don't know if it was a little bit of a punishment from the academic thing that was almost treated like a death sentence, which it shouldn't have been. But yeah, I was puzzled. I thought he specifically down the stretch could have been a benefit for Oklahoma, in the running game. But he ran the ball 10 times today, twice as many as he's had all year. So I like the fact that he got some carries, and he'll be a guy that should be a big contributor to this team next year. Out of the offense looked better tonight than they did all season long. Tebow was gone. I see good riddance. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the way most people feel, and I'm with you. I think it's a mutual breakup. Obviously, at this point, I think it was at the time, and I think it's definitely there now. You can definitely see that Oklahoma did not lose a beat without, without Riley there tonight. How would you grade Grimes and Downs? I think they both played well. I think Oklahoma, specifically in the first half, they were getting pressure on Anthony Brown a lot early on in the game. Didn't really play quite as well in the second half overall. But I like both of those kids. They're going to be counted on a lot next year. Both of those kids are likely starters on this defensive line next year. Who knows who steps up and who Oklahoma gets either from the portal or from the um, in the recruiting side of it. But I think those two kids are going to make a big season and are a big difference in next year in terms of how they played. You saw Clayton Smith get in there a lot on the defensive line. One guy that I thought played really really well was Marcus Stripling. Had a couple of sacks, really tackled well, played with a lot of anger, played with a lot of just tenacity out there. Love the way he played. So all three of those kids played well, no doubt about that. The one part that I was a little disappointed with was the play of our tackles. Didn't really think that Isaiah Coe or Kelly or Stokes played okay, but didn't think the tackles played really well. Redmond was good, but I think Oklahoma's good. But again, those kids are going to put on some weight. They're going to look a lot different than they did this year. Next year, I think the one thing that has to be glaring to both Schmitty and Venables is, and I'm sure they've watched some tape of Oklahoma defense this year, but just watching that, just seeing Oklahoma get gashed time and time again up the middle. So I think that no more of that speed D will be talked about in Oklahoma, and it'll be much bigger, much more physical type of guys that Oklahoma will have on that defensive line. You'll be better off going to the SEC would be. Yep, I absolutely agree with 100%. Um, yeah, I very much had compared I very much compared this to Kevin Durant years ago. I don't know if anybody here is basketball fans or even Oklahoma City Thunder fans on how much Kevin Durant was hated. He's still pretty hated, maybe not at the same veracity that he was originally, but I think this is very similar, maybe even worse. Um, you know, for Oklahoma. Oklahoma fans and their hatred for Riley. I think it'll be there for a while. Who the projected stars at safety? It's so early to tell. Next year, I think it'll be interesting to see what Oklahoma does with Key Lawrence. Do they keep him? Um, does he morph back into more of a safety type of player that Oklahoma thought? I think De'Aaron Turner Yale has the opportunity to come back for the extra fifth year COVID year. If he's back, he's absolutely a starter. I think Billy Bowman obviously enters into the conversation, maybe more so at a nickel side. I think Gentry Williams is good enough. If he commits to Oklahoma, he could probably start right away for the Sooners. So I think it'll be interesting to look at. We'll answer that question a little bit more firmly. I think Scott comes spring, but those are a couple of the guys that kind of come to mind initially. Robby Clark, what does tonight's game look like if Raleigh's coaching? Does Kennedy Brooks have the same kind of game he had tonight? I think he does. The latter half of that question, I think he does. I think the one thing that was different between Kale and Lincoln's play calling is you saw Kale be a little bit more committed to the run on a more consistent basis than Riley has been willing to be this year. So I think that's the one difference that I would see that Oklahoma was much more heavy on the run game than So maybe not quite as good of a game, but I think um, you've got to understand that you've got to do what the defense is willing to give you. And it was early. It was pretty clear early on that Oklahoma had the opportunity to run the ball really well. Oklahoma's offensive line outside of that very first drive of the game, played really well, specifically in run blocking and pass blocking as well. Caleb wasn't really wasn't under a ton of pressure, had some pressure, but no sacks that I remember, and like I said, ran for over 300 yards. So yeah, I think it would have been interesting to see the difference, but because I think Kale ran the ball a little bit more than Riley had been willing to do this year. Big T 37, thanks for joining. Um, Happy you all got the win tonight. Maybe you guys can finally move forward and stop acting cray time to move forward and stop letting Riley live rent free. And y'all say that. Big T, I don't. Are you a USC fan? Not sure. Um, what if you are, or if you're an Oklahoma fan, but yeah, I think it's certainly time for Oklahoma to move on, and I think they are. I think this was the last bit of um, Riley as part of 2021, and now Oklahoma's moving forward as well. So um, obviously, all those speedy coaches are leaving. Yeah, I think it's a very interesting. It's kind of a philosophical question in college football. I wonder. I have my doubts on whether that can work. Um, whether that type of scheme, whether that type of um, just thought process and how you want your players to look and play, is is it does it work at the level that you need it to work to win a national championship? And I don't know, and maybe we'll see if that's the case. Maybe specifically at USC when once he gets his guys in there, if that's a defense, I wonder if it's good enough for places like Washington State and really kind of not tr- un, unlike traditional powers that can get the best kids, and you've got to find a way at the Washington State level just to be competitive. Um, and I think that'll be interesting to see as well. But I like where Oklahoma's going in more of a traditional um, defense and being bigger, because that's what you got to do in the SEC. The bigger, stronger, faster. He looked like he was bigger. He definitely did. I don't know if he's been bulking up, and I don't know that he plays. He didn't play a ton with Benito out there, but yeah, I love the way he played. Jay played. He was probably the most impressive guy on the defensive side of the ball for me tonight. Bradley Carriger, thanks for. It's amazing how good the offense is when the play caller does completely forget the rushing ball. The thing, glad to see them carry the rock. Um, Absolutely, completely agree with your first point. Running the football. Uh, Defensive line. I mean, the ends played okay. Played pretty. They played decent, good enough. Didn't love the tackle play. Oklahoma got got gashed the middle of the defense all game long. It seemed Travis Dye had over 160 something yards rushing. For Oregon as well. So yeah, I mean, I agree with your first point, but parts of the defensive line played well. What's your percentage chance Caleb comes back? I would say probably in the 95% range that he comes back. I'm just kind of reading some things. Caleb hasn't said anything specifically. Says focuses on his family vacation in the upcoming days. Still would be surprised if he goes somewhere else. I would think at this point um, if he was going somewhere else, I would have expected he probably would have announced it by now. Um, I, Again, um, as I mentioned earlier, I don't I don't foresee him going anywhere. I think he'll be here. I think he'll fit into Levy's offense just fine. Would be very surprised um, if he leaves. Um, yes, Farouk played well. Expect Caleb to enter the. I don't. I just don't. I mean, it's just maybe it's a gut feel. Maybe it's Venables talking about how he's excited to have him come back and lead this team next year. So um, I don't think he enters the portal. Just my gut feel. Just the whether you want to call it a hunch or a gut feel or just based on what I'm seeing. But I don't see that happening. Uh, so he's multiple, Scott. So I think he does at times. Oklahoma, he has run a traditional tight end or H back, but sometimes he'll. And what go back and look at some of the UCF game film. Go back and look at some of the Ole Miss stuff, and you can even watch Ole Miss and Baylor, and then some of the old Baylor stuff when Art Briles was there. A lot of pre-snap movement, a lot of motion that he does. Really, really fast-paced offense that Oklahoma hasn't ran under Lincoln Riley, but more kind of a Kevin Wilson type of thing, more of kind of a Josh Heupel type of offense as well. Um, so yeah, they do use that traditional tight end, but they're very multiple in the way they attack you. Absolutely.